Yeah, good day, all of you. Today we'll be talking about a basic topic, but would like to reimburse your knowledge regarding especially its application when it comes to clinical practice. It's nothing but the class 1 and class 2 cavity preparations and how relevant it is today on contemporary dental practice. Now, we'll just go back to the pioneer of the classification, Dr. G.V. Black. Hope you know that it was given over 100 years back by this gentleman who went on to implement it to arrest and find a solution for dental caries. Even though initially there were only 5 types, but later on scientists just improvised and added the 6th type. This particular classification is also known as a therapeutic classification as it took into consideration the restoration designs for the caries affecting the tooth. Now, this classification was basically dependent upon the frequency and occurrence of caries on some aspects of the tooth. And one may ask how really relevant it is as per a student is concerned, especially with a lot of new innovative dental materials are concerned. They have come into the market like composites and ceramics and huge modified glass ionomer cements. But on an academic point, for a student, definitely it should be the verbatim. That is, you should know word by word. Now, let's let's go to the classifications as class 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We'll now go into the terminologies, but especially since I'll be covering up class 1 and class 2, I'll just restrict it to them. Now, coming to the class 1 cavity. Now, what exactly is this particular cavity preparation? It's nothing but a bioengineering terminology that is given that signifies the importance of giving the engineering principles or incorporating the engineering principles so as to remove the decayed and destroyed tooth structure as a result of caries or non-caries reasons. Now, class 1 cavity preparations are those particular cavity designs, either simple to complex, that have been prepared on the tooth, especially on the occlusal, as well as the proximal and the of the posterior tooth, and also on the lingual surfaces of the anterior tooth. Now, the steps basically, as we know, we'll just come to the steps. One is the outline form. Now, when one talks about an outline form, there are a huge number of factors that really determine the outline form. You will not get into the details of it since it's already been covered way back in your preclinicals. But to enumerate, there are around over 2 dozen of them. Most important being the extent of the caries. Now, when one says the outline form, it basically means as a dentist or as a student, when you're preparing the cavity, it means to what extent or what are the perimeter into which or the dimensions into which this particular cavity that you're going to prepare will limit itself to. Now, what are the factors that affect the outline form? They include the extent of the caries. Second, like if there is any sort of unsupported enamel beneath the dentin, or if there's any old faulty restorations, then obviously we know G.V. Black's concept, even though not followed nowadays, its extension for prevention. The current concept is constriction for conviction. Enameloplasty, which is nothing but like say for example, when you prepare a cavity and towards the periphery you find a small amount of defect, you want to incorporate the defect as part of that cavity. So it's this it's like this saucerizing of this particular defect with the help of a round burr or a pear shaped burr and getting into part of the cavity design. Now, the sixth factor being the amount of caries that are present in the overall hygiene of the individual, whether the margins of the are kept in cleansable areas and the breaking of the contacts, and margins should be in a finishable areas. Gingival relationship of the outline form, especially while placing of the gingival contact. We'll come to the details when we get to the class 2. Then the depth of the cavity, the location of the pulpal floor, where exactly you will place it. Noted that again, and just as we get in more details, we just will elaborate on it. The depth of the cavity, maintenance of the cuspal contour, the convenience for access, stress-bearing areas, especially avoided so as to prevent the fracture of the restorations, extension for resistance, especially giving of cuspal coverage. You don't want to give the outline form in such a way that you bring in weak tooth structure at a later date. This particular tooth itself will fracture, or the restoration will fracture on masticatory loading. Then the type of restorative material really definitely influences the outline form. Obviously, you don't want this particular a large perimeter cavity design that you're given for an amalgam. Not so be in case for aesthetic material like composites. Extension for retention, and also age of the patient and aesthetics. These are other factors that influence the peripheral preparation. Now, coming first to the ideal width of the cavity. Now, it should be 1/4 the intercuspal depth distance. Now, when you make the cavity, see to that you don't put the cavity onto the cuspal margins or cuspal ridges. Why? Because you end up weakening that particular tooth structure. Because cusp and other anatomical features like the oblique ridge or the marginal ridge, these are like the strengthening what do you call that, components of the tooth. You end up intentionally iatrogenically invading into these particular areas. You end up weakening that particular tooth. Right from 30%, it can go up to 50%, depending upon the amount of radical preparation that you have done on the tooth. So I restrict the cavity width to 1/4 the intercuspal distance. That is the primary principle out here. Then next, coming to the depth or the initial ideal depth. Ideally, you would say it is 1.5 to 2 millimeter. That is half the length of your straight fissure burr. That is 3 millimeter. Head of the burr is around 3 millimeter. The head of the burr is 3 millimeter. So you say half of the burr, that becomes guiding plane, wherein the measurement of the cavity can be made, especially from the center pit. Now, there's another way you can put it across, that is 0.2 or 0 to up to 2.8 millimeter beneath the dentin. Now, the question comes is why you can't place the cavity above this particular 0.2 millimeters into the enamel, especially when you're giving in for amalgam restorations. The answer is that enamel is the hardest substance in the human body, and it being non-elastic. And the material that you're using, especially for amalgam, you will not get this sort of retention form when you're retention, especially when you're placing this particular material into the enamel. So hence you place it into the dentin. Dentin, on the contrary aspect, is very elastic. It's said to be resilient. Noted. Resiliency of material means the springing nature of a particular material. So when you make the cavity, and later on you tend to condense the filling material into the preparation. Use your condenser. When you use your condenser, there is a chance that the springing, the dentin will spring down, and when you remove the condenser, it will get back to the original position, that is the dentin, thereby interlocking the restorative material and the dentin. So hence it's necessary that you need to keep this particular cavity design, especially for amalgam, in the dentin, that is 0.5, 0.2 to 0.8 below the dentin. Now, that is as per the resiliency of the dentin. The next question comes is, why is that you don't keep this depth at the dentin enamel junction or DG? Well, you know, obviously from your histological aspects, that dentin enamel junction is nothing but the termination of cytoplasmic extensions of odontoblasts, and there's a dichotomy of the dental tubules. So hence, this being a very sensitive zone, you don't want to keep this a particular material or the cavity margin in this particular area. So you keep it below the 0.2 to 0.8 millimeters beneath the dentin. And as I said, the maintenance of the marginal ridge, especially just like the cusp, are important anatomical landmarks on the particular tooth that helps to encapsulate or strengthen the tooth by a natural form of resistance. The more you damage these particular anatomical landmarks, that is the marginal ridge, the cusp, the oblique ridge, this is proportionally making the tooth as well as the restoration prone to fracture on masticatory loading. Now for a class 1, ideally it is 2 millimeter, that is the periphery of the dowtail to the periphery of the tooth. So see to that this particular 2 millimeter is kept. Again, next coming to the box-like preparation. How important this box-like preparation of the cavity is needed. If you're going to have a saucerized preparation, definitely you're going to have the forces dissipating in different direction, ultimately leading to the dislodgement of the restoration. A flat pulpal flow of ideal thickness of the restoration is quite important, such that the restorative material gets itself the proper resistance when it put in place. This also provides a sort of locking mechanism for the restoration and also helps in retention. Now coming to the burrs that we'll be ideally using out here. 245 burr, the head length of 3 millimeters, a tip diameter of 0.8, or a smaller 330 burr is ideally recommended to prepare the conservative class 1 tooth preparation. Occlusal convergence. Now when you make the cavity, see to that they are converging occlusally. But however, this is opposite when you do a class 1 buccal or a palatal extension, which should be diverging either in the mesiodistal direction. or when you do a class 5 cavity, the mesial and distal walls are diverging out rather than converging. This is largely got to do with the direction of the enamel rods. Obviously, you know that from the dental enamel junction to an occlusally directed area, say for example, pit, it is converging, whereas instead of the pit, if it is a cusp, it diverges. So in case of this class 1 extension, we have to diverge the walls, especially in the mesial and distal part of the cavity. It's not converging. This sort of converging actually, even though initially you can do it with the burr, but later on it can be further deepened out by using the inverted cone burr, especially while you're flattening the cavity. The next comes a flat pulpal flow. This is all got to do with the dissipation of the forces. You're not going to have a flat pulpal flow, which you can get it not just with the straight fissure burr, but also with an inverted cone burr. Again, doing the floor at multiple planes will again have some issues with the resistance form, especially occlusal dovetail, and that's another feature when you that is incorporated in a class 1 cavity. Dovetail, obviously, we know it's a primary retention feature that helps in the locking mechanism of the restoration along with the tooth. The other retention feature, as I said before, was making of the inverted cone shape cavity preparation. Another important feature, well, your important thing that you're supposed to do while you're preparing a cavity is that sometimes there are caries that go on to a particular anatomical area of the tooth structure, which obviously it's not under your control, but whenever you remove that particular caries, there can be some ideal compromise in an ideal preparation of the cavity. It's there wherein you take out this particular caries, but and include in part of the cavity. But however, see to that whenever you're removing this unsupported enamel, see to that it has been it rests on sound dentin, because later on you don't want this particular enamel collapsing under occlusal load. So hence you can remove this unsupported enamel. You got it, with the help of enamel chisels. Now, when you make this cavity, another thing is like, you know, there's line angles and point angles. I need not go into the details of what exactly these terminologies are. It's necessary that you round off these internal line angles and point angles, be it a class 1 or a class 2. You don't want these particular locations in the cavity to act as areas wherein the stresses go and hit those areas, thereby causing crazed lines on the tooth and cracking up of the restorations. So hence, you just keep it rounded, which you can do with the help of a round burr. And also, you can have certain hand instruments. Now, coming to the various modifications of class 1's cavity. Here we have class 1, design 1. There are numerous classifications given. Those given by Marsuk, Sturtevant. You have Mounds classifications. There's so many classifications, but I'll just go into a brief up of some of the modifications that are there. You have one that categorizes a class 1 as design 1, wherein to brief up, nothing but caries penetrating into the dentin, and that does not more, it's not more than 0.5 to 1 millimeter. One of the primary factors that are indicated is that the patient should have a good oral hygiene at a low caries index. Now, class 1 occlusolingual amalgam restorations. We'll just get a little bit into this. Wherein the lingual fissure connects the distal and oblique fissures as well as the distal pit. Then you have buccal palatal lingual extensions, wherein there is an extension of the cavity into the buccal as well as palatal aspect. I think most of you all would have done it in your preclinical and sometimes in third year. Mesial and distal walls are parallel. Retention grooves and little locks need to be given. That you can give it with the help of your straight fissure, the inverted cone burr. Axial walls, again, make an obtuse angle. Not it. It is not straight. Gingival seat should be at 90 degrees to the tooth. Now, here are some of the pictures of a class 1 amalgam restoration before and after. And there's one on that right side corner which gives you examples for extension and a complex amalgam cavity out here. Now, one thing to be noted is that even though I said that in my previous slides that even though we need to keep the cavity 0.5, 0.2 to 0.8 below the DEJ, suppose there may be caries in the pulpal flow which is going much beyond that. In those particular circumstances only, once again I'm repeating, it's only in those particular circumstances that that particular decayed landmark be scooped out, eradicated with the help of either spoon excavators or hand instruments, rather than removing the whole quantum of tooth structure and destroying the tooth structure and weakening it. And in those particular areas, you just apply a sub base or a therapeutic base, like you have calcium hydroxide. After that, on top of that, you apply varnish and then a zinc phosphate or a glass cyanomer base, depending upon the situation warranted. A conservative approach compared to the extensive preparation as given by G.B. Black. Here we have the cavity width again as 1/4 the intercuspal distance, that is around 1 to 1.5 millimeter. Depth of the cavity is 1.5 to 2 millimeter. Not it. You see the direction of the enamel rods, as I said before, at the cuspal tips and the cavo surface angle. Now, cavo surface angle, they say it should be a butt joint. Don't give a bevel. Now, why do you give the question always comes is, why do you give a butt joint or a 90-degree butt joint? Why can't you give a bevel, especially while you're giving in for restoring the tooth with amalgam restorations? This goes back to knowing one's knowledge on the properties of amalgam. Amalgams, the tensile strength is highly weak. So compared to the compressive strength. So tensile strength is nothing but the edge strength. So you don't want to keep this restorative material that has got a poor tensile strength that is like spreading onto this particular beveled area. Thereby at later on occlusal forces, this tends to get chipped off, marginal ditching, micro leakage, etc. Secondary caries and so on. And then that goes in for replacement of the restoration. As I said before, the distance between the periphery outline form to the border of the tooth greater than 1.6 millimeters, like that is ideally 2 burr heads of a 2-4 fiber. Now you see this right side picture wherein it's written incorrect, especially the cavity walls in the marginal areas, marginal wall areas. Now on the left side you have a corrected version wherein either it could be straight or there's a small degree of convergence, but to have it too much, it's said to be incorrect. Again, got to do with the direction of the enamel rods. You do like this, you're going to end up leaving unsupported enamel, or enamel that is having a lacunae of sound dentin, which ultimately results in collapsing of the tooth structure on occlusal loading. And just coming to the indications for your class 1 cavity preparations for amalgam: moderate to large restorations, restorations that are not in high aesthetic areas of the mouth. Say, for example, anterior tooth, definitely you don't want to have this silver filling right in front in the patient's mind. Restorations that have heavy occlusal contacts, restorations that cannot be well isolated. Again, tooth getting restoration being contaminated frequently with saliva. Restorations that extend onto the root surface. Abutment teeth for RPD. Temporary or caries controlled restorations. Now, I'll just get into the details of it. Conservative class 1 amalgam restoration. Initial tooth preparation. Now, what's the basic principle is what? Establishing the outline form by extension of the external sound tooth structure, while maintaining a specified limit and providing resistance and retention forms. I've already given you certain points that need to be taken into consideration while preparing the outline form. Not again be repeating it. An outline form, as I said, it means the initial peripheral margins of the cavity that you're preparing on the indicated tooth that contains the lesion. It could be caries or a non-caries. Now, it should include only the faulty, defective occlusal fissures. That is, in a way that sharp angles in the marginal outline are to be avoided. Occasionally, marginal outline for maxillary premolar is butterfly shape because of the extension to include developmental fissures facially and lingually. Initial tooth preparation resistance principles include extending around cusp to conserve the tooth structure and prevent the internal line angles from approaching the pulp bonds too closely. Here again, especially while you're making a cavity, more so in a class 2 cavity, there's a high chance for you to get pulpal exposure while making the box part, and trying to expose the mesiobuccal pulpon in a maxillary first molar. So go around the cusp and not onto the cusp, so as to conserve the tooth structure and don't destroy it. do place the internal line angles, but not so that it's just going into delicate areas where the pulpons are, as I told before. Now, especially when you're doing your plastic preparation maxillary first molar. Keeping facial and lingual margins in extension as minimal as possible between central groove and the cuspal tips. Minimally extending outline to include fissures. Now, fissures, obviously, you know that they are certain, what do you call, areas wherein they lodge are teeming with certain microbes, or they have more prone for the decay to progress. So you have a caries, and beside it is a fissure. You just slightly include it in part of the cavity. Don't extensively do it, because it's we have over the years we have modified the cavity designs. So see to that you try to include it if it is too extensively a fissure, and don't be too much invasive into it and end up unnecessarily destroying it. Minimally extending into marginal ridges without removing dentin support. Again, unsupported enamel, collapse of the tooth structure. Okay. Eliminating weak wall of enamel by joining two outline forms that come close to each other, less than 0.5 millimeters. Like say, for example, you have a particular cavity, and just beside it, your caries is there, and just beside it, another cavity is there. Now, if it is greater than this 0.5 millimeter, you make them as two separate cavities. But if it is lesser than that, you include it in part of a one cavity design. Initial tooth preparation, as I said before, you got it. Already told your making of the dimple, got it. And the usage of the 2,4 fibers. I'll not get into the details. I already told. The punch cut. Initial tooth preparation. There are certain guidelines that needs to be. You need to what do you call that? Keep in mind. That is extending the outline form to include an enamel undermined by caries, using of enameloplasty on the terminal ends of shallow fissures, and conserve the tooth structure as maximum as possible, establishing optimal conservative depth of pulpal wall, using of a 2,4 fiber that has got a head length of 3 millimeter and the tip diameter of 0.8, or a smaller number of 330 burr is recommended. Now, these burrs are specifically recommended, especially to provide any bulky tooth structure cavity preparation, on account of the fact that you do a wrong selection of the armamentarium. A 245 inverted cone burr reveals sides slightly convergent towards the shank and helps to provide an occlusal convergence of the facial and lingual preparation walls, especially the retentive form. You have slightly rounded corners of the end of 2,4 fiber. It helps to produce slightly rounded internal line angles and render the tooth more resistant to fracture from occlusal force. The initial punch cut that has been performed by orienting the burr that has its long axis parallel to the tooth crown. But then see to that it's been inserted directly to the faulty pit areas. As the burr enters into the pit, the proper depth of 1.5 millimeter, that is one half of the length of the cutting portion of the burr measured at the central fissure should be established. Burr length, the head of the burr length, as just to recollect y'all, is 3 millimeter, half of it, okay, 1.5 millimeter. Now, depending on the cuspal inclines, the depth of the prepared external walls will be 1.5 millimeter, and it can go to a maximum range of 2 millimeter. The pictures of the initial tooth preparation. Now, distal extension into distal marginal ridge should include fissure caries. Occasionally requires a slight amount of tilting of the distal, say for to about 10 degrees. Now, this is done keeping in mind the direction of the enamel rods. However, instead of giving this 10-degree taper, if you're going to make it convergent, as I said before, you're going to end up resulting in a margin that contains enamel without sound dented. Enamel without sound dented. Hence, especially when you go keep moving the burr, and more or less when you reach the marginal areas, see to that you tilt your burr to a 10-degree angle. This creates a slight occlusal divergence compared to the other part of the cavity where it was convergent. You have this slight amount of occlusal divergence to the distal wall to prevent undermining of the marginal ridge of its dentin support. Pictures. Now, with regards to pulpal flow, it should follow the dentino-enamel junction to maintain a more uniform pulpal depth. Ideal width of the isthmus need to be no more than the diameter of the burr. It has been demonstrated that the isthmus width of 1/4 the distance include any fissures that radiate from the pit. The remainder of any occlusal enamel defects is included in the outline form, and the facial and lingual walls are extended if necessary to remove the enamel undermined by caries. The remaining caries, and usually the old restorative materials, definitely will have to be removed during the final tooth preparation. Why this is to be done is because you don't want, you're obviously going to, there are certain cases wherein you have old fractured restorations coming down to the clinic and you want to replace the restoration, or like you have one cavity that is caries and on the another side the old amalgam restoration is there. You make a cavity and then that goes on to include that particular restoration, but don't try to save that particular area, just remove it, such that the new material or amalgam material that you're going to place does not interact with the old material, thereby affecting the strength of the final strength of the restoration. Final tooth preparation, which includes remaining of defective enamel and infected dentin, pulpal flow, pulp protection, wherever indicated, procedures for finishing of the external walls, finishing procedures of cleaning and inspecting the prepared tooth. It is important to provide an approximate 90 to 100 degrees cavo surface angle. That is an angle which will result in 80 to 90 degrees of the amalgam. You got it. It is 90 degrees for the tooth structure, whereas for the restoration it is around starting at 80 degrees. This is very important. Why? Because as I said before, it's got to all got to do with the physical properties of tensile strength of dental amalgam. This butt joint margin of an enamel and amalgam is said to be the strongest for both. Just keep this in mind. Every completed tooth preparation should be inspected, cleaned before restoration. Tooth preparation should be free of any debris. After rinsing the tooth with an air water syringe, again you use a cotton pellet or a commercially available applicator tip moistened with water. Now we'll just go to the next segment of the lecture, that is the class 2 amalgam restorations. Now, this is what you're going to do for your final year exams, class 2. A lot of precautions or things to keep in mind when you compare to your preclinicals, wherein you were doing your class 2, but you didn't have the patient life per se. So there was no problem with isolation, especially contamination with saliva. Here again, you can give LA local anesthesia in case it is cavities, caries is deep. Occlusal contacts, that is, now occlusal contacts, as I said, the significance of occlusion need to be kept in mind while you're preparing a cavity. As I said, for your class 1, when the upper tooth comes in contact with the lower tooth, not all the teeth are coming and joining at the same plane. Not it. There are certain space areas and there are certain point areas where the tooth come in approximation with the opposing tooth. Now this particular area where it comes in contact with the opposing tooth, these areas tend to act as stress areas. So when you make a cavity, see to that you don't keep the cavity margins in this particular areas so as to prevent the snapping of the restorations and also damage to the remaining tooth structure. Now, how do you get this high point areas or the stress bearing areas? You can put a articulating paper. The paper will mark itself, and there you just then accordingly you make your cavity such that you don't make the cavity periphery in these particular, go and rest these cavity periphery in these particular areas. Rubber dam isolation. Then and role of interproximal wedges, especially while this comes into the picture while you're breaking the contacts. We'll come into the details. Tooth preparation. Again, the steps are basically the same as that of your class 1. The only difference is that you have a box to prepare and the concentrations while you're preparing the box. Now, class 2 basically involves occlusal and proximal surfaces of the tooth. Initial tooth preparation. Again, outline form, the occlusal step, similar to the class 1 preparation. Same principles. Completed occlusal step should be stopped 2.2 millimeters short of the marginal ridge. Occlusal step in this area is a little bit wider faciolingually. Now, yeah, this is very another important component, the reverse curve. You would have heard about it, especially it comes when you have a broad contact area. And, this S-shaped curve, especially, is incorporated or made a component of your cavity preparation, especially while you're making the maxillary molar, first molar mesial cavity. Maxillary first molar mesio-occlusal cavity. I'll be more specific about it. Here, the proximal walls are perpendicular to the enamel rod direction. Hence, it's necessary to conserve the facial cusp, which can be lost because of a cavity preparation, a class 2 cavity preparation. Hence, you give this S-shape curve that helps to develop a 90-degree amalgam at the proximal margins. Now, coming to the proximal outline form. Again, isolation of the proximal enamel is quite essential. The burrs positioned to begin at the proximal ditch cut 0.8 millimeters of 245 burr diameter, that is 0.5 to 0.6 inches. Then it's extended gingivally to the desired level of the gingival wall. On the right side, you have a picture which shows the level to which you can make the gingival seat. There were various schools. Now, coming to the position exactly where will you keep the gingival seat ideally, that is in a non-carious situation where you are supposed to do a class 2 restoration or a class 2 cavity. You're supposed to place it supragingival, that is above the gingival margin, not equigingival, not subgingival. You can do so until and unless there is fracture or caries that goes below the gingival margin, you can make it more inclusive. But otherwise, most cases, you make it supragingival. Not it. Why? The reason is that you want to keep it in a self-cleansable area. Gingival seat, if placed beneath the gingiva, there will be chances that the sulcular fluid can go and affect the margins, constantly affect the margins of the gingival margins, and it can lead to micro leakage and again secondary caries. Okay. Then there could be a question that gingival sulcular fluid is alkaline in nature. Well, okay, yeah, it is alkaline in nature, but what if the gingiva is inflamed? The whole environment of the gingival sulcus becomes acidic, and you can have that particular area that is teeming with microbes or the juices of the microbes. Now, these are small thing factors that you need to keep in mind, which on a larger perspective, if you want to have a successful amalgam restoration that lasts for decades, you need to keep in these small tips. One of the biggest reasons why an amalgam restoration fails or that warrants a replacement is secondary caries that was a resultant of the marginal leakage. Micro leakage is the biggest cause for failure and replacement of an amalgam restoration. Those are the other causes also there. You have a separate chapter on failures in amalgam restoration. Around 30 or 40 factors are there, but leading the list is marginal leakage. Now, coming to margins, should clear the adjacent gingiva by 0.5 millimeters. That is breaking of the contacts. And if it can go in small lesions from 0.2 to 0.3 millimeters. Now, breaking of the contact ideally is done with an enamel hatchet. It is there where you place a wedge, you do a little bit of tooth separation, and when the cavity approximately goes towards a margin, you snap it off using an enamel hatchet. However, you can use a needle tip burr, but see to that you don't damage the adjacent tooth. That's one important precaution you need to keep in mind, that damaging of the adjacent tooth again leads to an open contact, foot lodgement, failure of the restoration. Now, why do you want to keep this particular geometrical configurations of 0.5 millimeter from the adjacent tooth? That is basically to keep the margins of the cavity in a self-cleansable area. Now, what do you understand by the term self-cleansable area? That is when you do oral hygiene procedure, like your regular toothbrushing itself, the tooth and the restoration should be in a visible area where the toothbrush tends to go and clean. And you don't want this particular area to be stuck up with food debris or uncleaned matter. Now, how do you check this 0.5 millimeter in clinically? You take a floss and just pass it down through, or you can use the tip of the fine straight fissure. Sorry, a fine straight probe, which you have in your armamentarium, operative armamentarium. Location of the final proximal margins, that should be established with hand instruments, chisels, hatchets, etc. Avoid extending into the gingival sulcus. As I said before, supragingival. Until and unless a particular situation warrants that it goes down, like for example, in caries or craze lines of caries, dental caries. And coming into the details part of the box, ideal dentin depth is 2/3 to 3/4 the diameter of the burr for the tooth crown, that is 0.5 millimeter to 0.6. Facial-lingual dimension is greater than the gingival occlusion. Isolate the weaken proximal enamel further. The burr is moved perpendicular to the proximal surface, parallel to the direction of the enamel rods. Side of the burr emerges slightly through the proximal surface at the gingival floor. You can see the right side picture, how two notches are placed, and then later on the sequelae, these notches are being connected. Mechanism by which the isolated enamel or the removing of the isolated enamel, the cross section view. Removing of remaining undermined enamel, the principles for which I have already told before, either using enamel hatchet, facial-lingually, or gingival walls. Direction of mesiofacial and mesiolingual walls. Now, as I said, it's very important, like when you make your cavity preparation, that the mesiofacial walls and the mesiolingual walls need to be conferred or configured depending upon the direction of the enamel wall, so as to finally prevent the collapse of the weakened enamel. To conclude, resistance form is achieved by pulpal gingival walls being flat and perpendicular to the forces that are directed to the long axis of the tooth, restricting extensions of walls to allow strong ridges and cusps, restricting the occlusal outline form to areas receiving minimal occlusal contact, reverse curve, optimizing the strength of amalgam and tooth structure at the junction of the occlusal step and the proximal box, slightly rounding off the internal line angles so as to prevent or reduce the stress concentrating in these tooth structure. Now here again in a class 2, I forgot to mention that at the axiopulpal line angle, you have to keep it rounded rather than sharp. Because if you're going to keep it sharp, there's going to be a lot of stress concentration at these particular areas, which are going to be directly directed at an obtuse angle to the isthmus area in the margin, which can ultimately lead to fracture of the margins in these particular areas. That is, in a class 2 restoration, the highest chance where the tooth restoration can fracture is at this particular area, that is in the box area, the isthmus area, that is the area that is directly perpendicular to the gingival seat. Now, how does this fracture? A lot of reasons are there. One of the most common reason is that you are not rounded up the axiopulpal line angle, and then what happens is that the stresses, because when the patient starts biting, the stresses tends to go and hit work on these areas, and there's an oblique direction of forces being transmitted right into the isthmus area. That is the region, the marginal region that lies perpendicular to the gingival seat. This leads to its collapse. Then the 6 is providing enough thickness of restorative material to prevent fracture under mastication. As I said, 1.5 millimeter cavity in proportion, adequate amount of restorative material. Primary retention is achieved by occlusal convergence, facial and lingual walls by dovetail design of the occlusal step if present. Inverted cone burr, as I said before, in that class 1 cavity. Convenience or access in molars and premolars with proximal lesions. The occlusal surface or part of it should include in the cavity preparation for access purpose. To conclude, resistance feature form can be achieved by pulpal gingival walls being flat, perpendicular to the forces that are directed to the long axis of the tooth, restricting the extension of the walls to allow strong ridges and curves. As I said before, it's quite important that you fortify the cusp by not destroying them iatrogenically, thereby weakening the tooth structure, restricting the occlusal outline form to areas receiving minimal occlusal contact. Reverse curve, optimizing the strength of the amalgam by getting 90-degree amalgam and the tooth structure at the junction of the occlusal step and the proximal box. Slightly rounding off the internal line angle so as to reduce the stress concentration in the tooth structure, providing enough amount of thickness of restorative material to prevent fracture under mastication. Primary retention form is achieved by occlusal convergence, facial and lingual walls by dovetail design of the occlusal step present, convenience or excess in molars and premolars. The proximal lesions and the occlusal surface or part of it should be included in the cavity preparation for access purpose only. Final tooth preparation, removal of the remaining defective enamel and infected dentin. Small to moderate size carious lesions on the pulpal floor, you just remove it with a round burr. You just place sub base with calcium hydroxide or any other therapeutic base like glass enamel. Then on top of that, you apply varnish and then zinc phosphate. Don't radically just alter the whole pulpal floor depth. Moderate to extensive carious lesions on the enamel and axial wall. There again, as you see in the picture, only that particular part of the axial wall that has been infected by caries you remove. You don't just remove the whole axial wall. Pulp protection, especially in moderately deep excavations. Secondly, resistance and retention form, beveling of the or rounding of the axiopulpal line angle by slanting the axial wall. You make it slanting. Rather than using the word beveling, I would like to be more, you can just tell a little bit of rounding you can do rather than using the word beveling. By slanting of the axial wall, bulk is improved by increased depth rather than increased width. Proximal retention boxes, you see in those corners of the axial wall, how you can make this sort of retentive locks and grooves. These are all secondary retentive features. Pins, slots, grooves, and that can be made with the help of these burrs like 169L burr made with number 1/4 burr. Finishing of the external walls. You can use your hand instruments, especially removing the gingival, especially at the gingival cable surface margin, wherein you get around 20-degree cleaning and inspecting and desensitizing and bonding in case you're placing other aesthetic materials. There are certain variations in the proximal box tooth preparations. Like say, for example, in mandibular first premolar, the tooth is slightly lingually tilted. So morphologically, it is different. If you're not going to keep this in mind, there's a chance that you can end up in a pulpal exposure. You have a prominent transverse ridge out here. So as per the premolar is concerned, you need to slightly tilt the burr lingually. Maxillary first molar. These are the designs. You have a conservative, you have a conventional, you have a class 2 with a buccal and a palatal extension. There are so many modifications. You have box only preparations. Box only preparation, especially indicated in small proximal lesions without occlusal fissures, retentive locks are compulsory because you're not having any particular other the dovetail or other retentive features. 0.5 millimeter depth at the gingival point angle. Modifications in tooth preparations include slot preparations. Here, slot preparation, these are like different topic per se as such. Modifications in cavity preparations, we'll get into detail as per that is concerned. Just go through this. Box preparation and all this slot preparation, tunnel preparations. Okay, fine. That concludes. Thank you. Thank you for the cooperation. Thank you.